Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. How do you lip-read a robot? AI-powered HR tech has a disability problem. My name is Jürgen Menzer. I'm the coordinator of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network, and I'm very excited to introduce this webinar on such an important issue. Just before, I would like to go through a few housekeeping issues. This conference, well, rather webinar, is being recorded for those unable to attend and will be shared publicly afterwards. International sign is available, and you should see the international sign interpreter next to me in a separate window. There's also live captioning in English available. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, and please submit any questions you have through the Q&A box, the Q&A function you should see and find at the bottom of the screen. There's also the chat open, so feel free to engage with other participants or also with the panelists directly. But please be reminded questions should not be put in the chat, but through the Q&A box. As I said, my name is Jürgen Menzer. I'm a middle-aged white man with a scruffy beard and headphones on my head and a light blue shirt today. As always, usually I'm always using light blue shirts, it seems. Anyways, since it's a webinar of the Global Business and Disability Network, I just want to highlight that we chose this topic of AI-powered HR tech again. We had a webinar in the past on the topic, but since the developments are quite rapid and new risks are actually coming up in the use of AI in the world of work, especially from a disability rights perspective, we felt the need to organize today's webinar. And in general, we as ILO Global Business and Disability Network, or rather its secretariat here in the ILO, International Labour Organization, we try, of course, to follow the latest trends when it comes to employment of persons with disabilities and any risks that are associated with these trends. And definitely AI is such an important, well, I don't know if it's the right term, trend, but obviously it will not go away. It will only increase in its extent and impact. So it's key to address disability inclusion issues from as early on as possible. But with this said, I'm very pleased to hand over to Susan Scott Parker. She's a strategic advisor to the ILO Global Business and Disability Network and has very many labels and titles, one of them also being the founder of Disability Ethical AI. So Susan, over to you, and you'll see me and hear me later again. But in the meantime, my pleasure to hand over to Susan and the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. So as Jürgen says, we all know that AI is unavoidably going to have an exponentially growing impact, for good and for ill, on every part of our lives in the years to come. However, our discussion today is very focused. We are looking at an exploding HR technology marketplace. Investment in the last year alone is looking to be circa $12 billion US. And we're discussing the implications as this still very new and still unproven HR technology and the often dubious science that underpins it triggers risks on a scale that can no longer be ignored. AI-powered HR tools have the potential to damage the life chances of hundreds of millions of persons with disabilities around the world as job seekers and as employees. And that includes, of course, the millions of us who will acquire disabilities in the years to come. So as Jürgen referenced, over the past few months, a small community of thought leaders, including the ILO, GBDN, the European Disability Network, the global law firm Simmons & Simmons, Atos, Genius Within, and distinguished researchers from prestigious universities, including New York University, Erasmus, Melbourne, Oxford Brookes, all beginning to ask that crucial question, why are people with disabilities missing from the responsible AI agenda? And why are neither the developers nor the buyers of this technology, nor indeed those influencing the ethical AI debate, asking, and what about disability? Even though, just to remind us, the World Health Organization states at least 15%, often more, of the population of any country will have a disability. Even though 1 in 5 women have a disability, And 1 in 3 people aged 50 to 64 will have a disability, regardless of their ethnicity. Even though at least 10 to 12% of any large workforce will have a disability and or a chronic health condition. And I think if we look at it through my eyes, even though 1 in 3 data scientists will have a disability or have someone who does in their immediate circle of family and friends. So since we started up, I am pleased to say we are seeing some progress, but it's very clear that we need to build not a bridge, but a superhighway between the researchers who are beginning to define and highlight these risks, those who purchase and deploy these technologies, and the regulators. So just to set the context for our discussion today, if we take the recent research from New York University, they tested 2 artificial intelligence tools, Crystal and Humanitic AI, which claim to analyze your personality for recruiters by the words you use on your LinkedIn profile or your resume. Professor Julia Stojanovic shows beyond any doubt that their quasi-science is not valid as it assesses any candidate's personality, never mind those with disabilities. But how many HR directors will have seen that report? Indeed, how many in the audience will have seen it? Have they seen the groundbreaking report from the University of Melbourne into what he calls the emerging data harms to people with mental health conditions? Or the German research, again, not disability specific, which showed a candidate's personality scores changing from up to 10 to 20 percentile points when they put on their glasses or put on a headscarf or put a painting on the wall behind them, but in camera. Imagine if the camera spotted your wheelchair or your hearing aids. My favorite must be the Swedish Borg robot, which we are told is free from human bias. It is a female-voiced and white-faced interviewing robot, and which cannot take into account either the accommodations needed for the interview or those which the employer would need to make, which would enable the candidate to do the job on an equal basis and get the job. Another product claims to do virtual competency-based testing. For example, they ask, would work in this warehouse suit you? The test itself is completely and utterly inaccessible to deaf people, visually impaired, dexterity, so many others. My point being, however, that the very idea that it could or should be accessible had never, ever occurred to the developers. A leading recruitment company, HireVue, has made it very clear that it is their customers, not HireVue, who will be held liable, who are at risk, should job seekers assessed by HireVue claim to have been treated badly. The developer just provides the data. It's up to the employer to decide how to use it. Yet how many buyers have really heard this buyer beware message and coming from a vendor? And now we have the workforce productivity surveillance technology. Can it be taught to disregard the impact of someone's disability on how they interact with their keyboard and the camera? Really pleased that Neil's with us today to take us through what we can expect from and about this fast-growing industry sector. Some regulators are beginning to ask the right questions and to highlight the risks to the employer under existing equality legislation. And Gerard Quinn will tell us a bit more about the immediate risks in terms of human rights legislation soon. But rigorous regulations governing employer practice are still a long way off. And even further off are the technical standards that the developers require. Can we expect to see regulations requiring the HR tech developer to prove their products are safe for disabled and other marginalized populations before they can put them on the market? Our challenge is to bring the world's 1.3 billion people with disabilities into the worldview of those influencing this crucially important debate. So if we do nothing else today but inspire everyone with us in every future conversation about data bias and the impact of AI on humankind, if we inspire all of us to ask quietly but firmly, and what about disability every time, well, we'll have had a very successful webinar indeed. So thank you. Those are my introductory remarks. And I'd very much appreciate it now if my distinguished panel could take a quick moment to introduce themselves. Gerard Quinn, please introduce yourself. And you're on mute, Gerard. Mute.
Yes, the technology is defeating me already. Hello, I'm Gerard Quinn, the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities. And as Susan has already alluded to, we issued a report last year specifically focused on artificial intelligence and disability. Thank you.
Thank you. And Phyllida Swift.
Hi, everybody. My name is Phyllida Swift, and I am the CEO of Face Equality International. My visual description is I'm wearing a pink jumper, tortoiseshell glasses, and I've got my brown hair tied up on top of my head, and I have a facial scar. So Face Equality International, we are an alliance of 37 worldwide NGOs working to end the discrimination and indignity experienced by people with facial disfigurements around the globe. Thank you.
Thank you. And Elias, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Elias Apreko. I'm a person who stammers. I am currently the Executive Director of the Ghana Stammering Association. I also serve on the Advocacy Committee of the Ghana Federation of Disability Organizations, and basically looking at promoting the rights of persons with disability. My video description is I'm a Black man from Africa, Ghana. I am wearing spectacles. I'm in a white Lacoste top, and my height's about 5.8 feet tall. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
So we get to quote the brands that we're wearing in this new way of introducing ourselves. How interesting. And so I think that takes us to Neil Milliken. What brand are you wearing today?
Ralph Lauren. So I'm Neil Milliken. I'm the Global Head of Accessibility for Atos. I'm a middle-aged white male with short cropped hair and a short cropped beard wearing pink glasses. So I'm responsible for both our policy and our delivery on accessibility, and I'm very interested in this topic because it affects so many of us.
Thank you very much. Right then. And so I'm going to ask each of our panel members to speak for a few minutes about a particular aspect of this issue that directly relates to their world. So Gerard, could you open up with an overview of your work in this domain, and as you referenced, the paper that you launched in March?
So thank you very much, Susan. It's always a pleasure to join you and our good friends at the ILO. Whenever people talk about artificial intelligence, they probably turn off. After all, a lot of the technology in modern life is quite intimidating and remote and no longer as intuitive as it was once promised a few years ago, and I can attest directly to that. Actually, it's a mistake to turn off. Our world has been remade as we speak, and one of the hallmarks of previous turning points in history was that the terms of human coexistence were reset. Suddenly, everything changes, including our expectations from one another. There is a reason why artificial intelligence is called the fourth industrial revolution. This poses many risks for groups such as people with disabilities, and it also offers many new opportunities. And is with all of these new developments, the task of government is really to properly assess the balance of risk and opportunities and chart a way forward. We might, of course, simply abandon our fate to the logic of the technology. In this sense, there's an air of inevitability about the unfolding future, but that would be to abandon our responsibilities to try and ensure that this revolutionary technology is put to good service for humanity. And rest assured, if we do not apprehend the balance of risks and opportunities properly, then the furthest left behind will have no chance to catch up in the 21st century. One state criticized me at our last appearance before the UN General Assembly about 3 weeks ago for focusing on armed conflicts and disability. Their point was that I should confine myself to soft social policy issues, the traditional bread and butter of disability policy. I think the answer is obvious. The UN Disability Treaty, which enjoys near universal ratification, broadens the lens and makes us see how things are connected. The days of fixating on soft social policy issues and disability are over. Indeed, the future of social policy itself is an issue. Focusing on grand challenges facing humanity and the place of persons with disabilities within them is not only allowed by the UN Disability Treaty, it's arguably required by the treaty. Otherwise, we're fated to repeat the mistakes of the past. We missed the train on web accessibility at the beginning of the third industrial revolution, the internet, in the early 1990s, and we've been trying hard to catch up ever since. Let's not make the same mistake this time around. Last year, I produced and presented my thematic report on artificial intelligence to the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council. I was very pleasantly surprised to see how many other UN Special Rapporteurs had devoted attention to the subject, and was very impressed with bodies like the Australian Human Rights Commission for its very close attention to the human rights implications of AI. And I was also pleasantly surprised to see how many states took an active part in the debate, 73 states in all, which shows a huge hunger and appetite for this kind of reflection. My intention in our AI report was not to be definitive. My intention was to expand the policy imagination of states, to avert their gaze to the many opportunities sitting alongside the many risks of AI. And my intention was to start a conversation about how to optimize these opportunities and minimize the risks. This requires reflection and intentionality, and not simply allowing trends to just drift. And this requires, in turn, a clear enunciation of the public interest as the technology unfolds. You will hear from many today about how the technology works. I won't rehearse all of that. Suffice it to say that it detects patterns of behavior, predicts patterns of behavior, nudges human behavior, especially consumer behavior, and makes decisions normally left to human intervention. You will no doubt have seen that one contentious possible application talked about at the moment is on AI-driven content moderation on social platforms. On the plus side, as Susan has already alluded to, there are many potential breakthroughs for persons with disabilities, but they have to be nurtured and not left to chance. For too long, we've suffered because of the gross inefficiencies in our social support systems. Now they can be reinvented to genuinely personalize supports to meet individual needs and preferences. We will be writing about that in our next thematic report, which will focus on the transformation of services in the 21st century. Imagine the breakthroughs in a sphere like independent living. The mental health applications too are startling, with researchers like Piers Gooding pioneering AI-driven apps to enable peer-to-peer support and avoid coercive measures. So the seemingly utopian dream of ending coercion is brought closer within the realm of possibility, in part by the technology. The risks emanate partly from the under-inclusive nature of the data sets used to populate the algorithms. Put bluntly, many of them encode ableism. And if this is encoded, it is doubly hard to detect and to remove. This is in due part to the reality that these codes are written behind closed doors and protected from inspection by intellectual property laws, especially as embedded in international trade treaties. And of course, one of the things that the UN Disability Treaty precisely calls for is a rebalancing of its equality provisions with intellectual property law. We did this with the Marrakesh Treaty. There is no a priori reason why we cannot do it in this domain also. This is very real world effects, and I'm sure Face Equality International would share with you the many detrimental effects of AI in the employment context. Revealingly, a facial twitch, as already alluded to, can be interpreted by the software as untrustworthiness in the job. You may even be screened out of consideration without you even knowing it. Who to sue? Can you sue a machine? how to sue if you aren't even aware that these decisions are being made about you. Surely it is within the wit of man and the tech developers to use the software to assist in the search for reasonable accommodation, something that's conspicuous by its absence in much of the software to date. Also, a keen observer will notice something else. In this new AI-driven world, you and I are the sum total of what we consume electronically and the trail we leave behind electronically. Ergo, cogito ergo sum becomes computo ergo sum. And maybe I'm the only one, but I do worry about the inherent potential in AI for social determinism, a reduction of the person to his or her electronic trail. I don't know about you, but I like to think I am more than this, or maybe this is just one of the things that the new industrial revolution will make permanent. I'm not looking forward to that. What's to be done? The most important thing is to make people aware of the game-changing nature of the technology and to motivate them to become involved in the relevant debates. The relevant debates often seem technocratic and mystifying, and on the surface they are, but a job of work needs to be done to make the debates plainly accessible. And once they are, it will be obvious that the stakes are very high. Next, we need to create a common space where industry, developers, users, for example, employers, persons affected, which include persons with disabilities, and governments can reflect together on minimizing risks and realizing opportunities. All and any fora are welcome. I personally like to link this debate to the human rights responsibilities of the private sector. We can all see how this is a moral imperative for an industry that is an engine for economic growth. But we can also all see how this is vital if public confidence is to be maintained as the fourth industrial revolution unfolds before our very eyes. Back to you, Susan, and thank you very much.
And thank you. You're quite right. You know, we never even got on board the third industrial revolution. And so thank you very much. Thought-provoking as ever, Gerard. I'm going to turn quickly now to Phyllida Swift. As Gerard said, your constituents, if we may call them that, have a particular concern. Please share with us.
Of course, yes. So our constituents would comprise of those with facial disfigurements, and I will use that term throughout interchangeably with facial difference. This means any mark, scar, or condition which affects facial appearance. So the rights of people with disfigurements are often intertwined with legal and societal definitions of disability. Frequently, these definitions adopt a medical model approach, which can fail to recognize or protect the unique experiences of people who look different. And so the issue often remains hidden being the operative word for many people with disfigurements living in places where the stigma is so severe that they are banned from attending school, hidden away, banned from going out in daylight even. Ever more pertinent here, where it's increasingly more evident that disfigurement has been hidden from the process of developing AI, in that diverse faces have clearly not been built into data sets in software development. We're so grateful to have the opportunity to be here today because artificial intelligence poses a massive risk to our community. And facial recognition software is, of course, the biggest red flag. And the deep fears that we hear from our community are that AI will perpetuate and deepen appearance bias into the future. A critical concern is, of course, employment. Outside of the digital world, many employees tell us they are overtly told to stay in the back office, told not to take part in company-wide photos, and denied public-facing roles. A recent study by About Face Canada actually found that 3 in 5 people with facial differences noted that they have been negatively impacted at work due to their facial difference, and with 50% having had a difficult experience during recruitment. With so much of this being down to human bias, the hope would be that AI would lessen barriers in recruitment for facially diverse people. But sadly, the research indicates otherwise. A 2020 study from Shark found that 29% of job candidates' employability score through AI software comes from facial expressions. 29% of their employability score. Many facial differences, however, can inhibit full facial expression, in particular smiling. Facial paralysis or facial palsy and conditions such as Moebius syndrome prevent someone from smiling. Scarring, also from accidents or from burns, can inhibit full facial function. My own experience after I was in a car accident meant that I couldn't blink fully for a while, which would have caused problems using my current banking app, which requires me to blink in order to approve payments. It's not fair nor adequate a response to offer alternative routes such as passcodes that are more cumbersome. There also may be stigma towards applicants who opt out of that standard route. A non-AI study in America from Rankin and Borah found that photos of people with disfigurements were rated as significantly less honest, employable, intelligent, trustworthy. The list goes on. So is this a human bias that has been replaced with AI that disproportionately discriminates based on appearance? And will the software screen people out entirely? The AI, as Gerard said, threatens to produce a transparency void, making it hard for the user to understand the reason for these barriers or understand who is responsible for them. This might make proving discrimination even harder than it already is, placing the burden once again on the victim to challenge injustice, coming up against far better resourced businesses that are adopting AI into their standard practice in such a way that we fear will standardize outright discrimination. It's important to frame this beyond HR and recruitment too. So further examples include denied entry via facial recognition passport gates, or having photo ID applications refused. So the World Bank found that someone with Down syndrome was denied a photo ID card as their non-standard face was not recognized as a human face. The same goes for someone with albinism. So what's the subtext of this? It's that non-normative faces are not valued. Censorship by algorithms on social media is also a massive problem. There's a terrifying glitch in the software that exists across all major social media platforms right now, which came to light when an activist with a facial cleft went to post a selfie to find the image blurred out and the accompanying text reading violent, sensitive, or inappropriate content. The same has happened to a mum posting a family photograph, including her son who has one eye. His photo was removed from Instagram entirely for breaching community guidelines. We've got a whole bank of these cases right now. And this censorship, once again, tells people with facial differences that online spaces are not a place for them, not a place for them to exist, nor express themselves freely. So I hope that I've made clear that at Face Equality International, as an alliance of organisations with direct access to 50,000 constituents, upwards of, that we are devoted to making ourselves available to facilitate meaningful, responsible consultation with those with lived experience. Facial difference must be impressed firmly into the debate on ethical AI, and regulators must help us to ensure that the onus is on developers and those adopting softwares to test evidence and prove that AI will not harm nor exclude people with disfigurements. We need more participative research to ensure that the impact of AI on people who look different is fully understood across the globe and that disadvantage can be prevented before it occurs. Together, we can ensure the inclusion of distinctive faces and the most vulnerable faces in data sets will not just prevent further marginalization of minorities, but as a byproduct, this will also better serve the masses by proving AI to be safe for every face. Thank you.
Let me in. Can you hear me now? Am I back? So thank you very much, Phyllida. I was struck fairly early in your presentation when you pointed out that actually people with facial disfigurement and other disabilities used to encounter human bias, but it was on a random basis. You might get lucky and find a recruiter who didn't get distracted by your appearance. But now, of course, the threat is that this kind of bias will be bedded in, designed in, and impossible to avoid every time. So if we could move on to Elias. Elias, could you tell us something of the situation for people who stammer as you encounter this fourth industrial revolution?
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Suzanne, for the opportunity. Yes, stammering is compared to other disabilities is relatively unpopular. It means that already persons who stammer are facing a lot of bias and discrimination in respective fields that define themselves. Stammering, they say, it's like an iceberg. So a little bit of it is found above the water, but majority of it is found beneath the water. And for persons who stammer, stammering does not only cover the blocks, the pauses, repetition of words, what you hear from started voices, but also things that are beneath the surface of the water, like anxiety, like fear, inability to take up jobs that you are qualified for because of your stammer. And therefore, going for job interviews are extremely difficult tasks for persons who stammer. Even for people who don't stammer, we cannot attest to the fact that going through the process of a job interview is a very daunting task. It's a very, very daunting task. And therefore, for a person with a stammer already dealing with the heavier aspect of the iceberg, with the fear and anxiety of being at a job interview, it is a very difficult situation. And therefore, we would have expected that technologies such as AI will be able to eliminate such bias and discrimination that we face at job interviews. There are several of examples where persons who stammer have been denied opportunity for a job, for their dream job, because the employers and recruiters felt that because they stammer, they will not be able to deliver on their job mandate, especially when it involves speaking and public speaking, which is very, very unfair. So therefore, AI technology can be a very effective technology or tool for eliminating such biases. Every time I talk about AI, I do not discount the benefits that it's bringing to the world. Even especially for job recruitment, it makes the job relatively easier for recruiters and employers to be able to deal with the myriad of applications coming through. It's a very good technology. And if it is utilized properly, it will help drive inclusion and equality in the areas of education and even employment. But if it is not effectively used, then it will bring the discriminatory impact on persons who stammer and the general disability community as a whole. So we say that out there, about 50 million voices of employable age stand the risk of job biases and being eliminated from getting the right opportunity to the dream job that they desire. Now, how would AI technology employed in recruitment process be a discriminatory tool for persons who stammer? For instance, many HR software or AI technology is looking for is looking for the candidate that has the characteristics of the company's ideal hire or their ideal employee. And that very ideal employee may not be a person who stammers. And therefore, during the recruitment process, they are looking out for some features that obviously persons who stammer do not have. For instance, there is a standard time that you would have to answer questions. So let's say that five minutes is set for candidates who are applying for a job. And obviously, for me and for other persons who stammer, we will need more time, especially for persons with severe stammer. That takes a longer time for them to string out a complete sentence. It takes more minutes for a person who stammers to be able to get their point across compared to the fluent speaker. Therefore, if the AI recruitment tool is going to assess my performance based on, let's say, posture, then it is placing me at a disadvantage because for persons with disability, we make a lot of gestures. Sometimes you need to move your head, you need to make a lot of gestures to be able to get your words out. And therefore, that makes it very discriminatory for me. It puts me at a disadvantage. If you're looking at things like non-verbal communication, just like posturing, it puts me at a disadvantage. Now, if you take an example like eye movements, if the AI recruitment tool is going to assess me based on my eye movements, that also places me at a disadvantage because for persons who stammer, usually we do not even make eye contact. It's very difficult to make good eye contact because you are focused on bringing your words out, trying to make that meaningful communication that you have to make. So that puts me at a disadvantage. Now, if you take a feature like vocal tone, I might not have that vocal tone because of my stammering. I'll not be able to have that smooth vocal tone as the company's ideal candidate because of my stammer. If you look at another example like my word choice, now I'll not be able to use the same words as the company's ideal hire because for me, stammering, I would want to substitute my words because probably I would stammer more on a particular word. So I would like to use word substitution. And that puts me at a disadvantage. So ideally, we are saying that AI recruitment tools are perfect for the world. It will help eliminate bias and discrimination if employed well. But if not, then it places us at a disadvantage. Therefore, we should make reasonable accommodation for such tools to be able to accommodate persons who stammer and persons with disability as a whole, so that this very tool does not become a hindrance to us, but rather helps to eliminate that human bias and discrimination that comes out because of job recruitment. Thank you very much. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Elias. As I listen to you, I'm thinking it's a miracle anyone gets a job fairly. I mean, I was thinking of all the Italians who like to use their hands and French people and Canadians who live in London who use their hands a lot. It's amazing. However, Neil, you also know something about some of the impact of these kinds of movements and so on people's careers. Tell us from your perspective what you think we need to be looking at in terms of the surveillance technology and of course anything else that occurs to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Susan. So yes, as someone that lives with ADHD, I can't sit still. So so I move around a lot, and that might not be something that's desired by some of the interview tools. I think that we clearly saw a benefit during the COVID pandemic, where everyone was at home, in people understanding that it's possible to remote work. But then we also saw a certain management reaction in terms of how a concern around how are they going to control employees. And there has been a rapid uptake in all kinds of employee monitoring software, which claim to improve productivity and monitor this and make sure that things are secure. But a lot of these things measure certain things and don't really take into account job design or people's disabilities, and that even though they may be doing the same job, they're going to be doing it in a different way. So for example, some of the activity monitoring will look at your keyboard. Others will look at mouse movements. Well, if you're blind and use a screen reader, you're not going to use your mouse at all. So that might trigger some flags in the system. Also, looking at time spent and what you're doing. And so a while back, Microsoft were looking at productivity of meetings and giving people productivity scores, and they were looking at things like, well, whether or not you're having a good meeting in terms of you're focused on the meeting and not typing and so on. And I don't think you'll find a single meeting where I'm not typing, because I know that if I have an action, for example, it would have fallen out of my brain before the end of the meeting. So quite often during meetings, I will send an email because I'm taking an action, or I'm putting something into a system to remind me to do it later. So unless you have someone to support you doing all of this stuff, then you may end up with a low productivity score, and that may then impact on your performance benefits, or even to the point where you're at risk of being made redundant. So understanding the different ways in which people actually interact with systems and the types of roles they do is really important. And at the moment, a lot of these tools are sort of measuring the wrong thing. So they're looking at output rather than outcomes. And that's really a problem for the wider disability community, because the way that we input to create those outputs is different. And so they're really sort of not designed to understand how we might work. For example, other things might get in the way as well. So there's an awful lot of concern over confidentiality and risk and so on and so forth, which causes companies to sort of lock down systems. And quite often people with disabilities also sometimes need human help. And often in companies, those people that are there to assist them aren't employed by the employer of the person that needs the help. That means that they're not on the company systems. And if you're remote working, then you don't have that person to the side of you to be able to view your screen. And so what people end up doing is emailing documents to someone that's outside of the organization. That creates a security risk flag. That person may be deemed to be a threat to the organization. And so again, it's putting that employee at risk of censorship and being marked down on all sorts of things, and maybe even risking their job. So the idea of employee trust is somewhat corroded by the use of these systems, and there has been quite a lot of pushback from the broader employee community, let alone the disability community. Again, looking at productivity. Well, sometimes these systems don't look at breaks, and if you have a condition that requires you to take toilet breaks, you need comfort breaks just to every so often, that might fall outside of the parameters that have been designed within the system. You may be perfectly capable of doing your job, but because you're taking too many breaks and you're away from your desk and you're not typing or moving your mouse for a few minutes, that can give you a negative score. So I think that these things are not insurmountable, but we need to understand what's behind these systems and what's in the design of these systems, because at the moment, as Susan mentioned at the beginning, they seem to be a bit of a black box. And that's really where explainability of AI comes in, because people need to understand how you get results from these AI-driven systems, and therefore how to change the parameters to make them more inclusive. Obviously, there's an awful lot of stuff that still needs to be done because you know, there are not inclusive data sets. A lot of the inbuilt bias in these AI systems is because there is not sufficient inclusive data in the first place, and we're building in that historical bias, as Gerard said. One last example to take on the point that Elias mentioned. He may be marked down because of his word choice. My word choice varies definitely between spoken and what I write. I'm also dyslexic as well as ADHD. Therefore, my written language is often quite short, and I use a limited vocabulary, and I'm much more expressive when I talk. Now, if it's looking at written work and not monitoring every word that I say on every single meeting, then I'm likely to be marked down on the quality of my written work. So again, everything comes down to understanding the differences and the flexibility of individuals and how they work, and looking at results. And at the moment, the design of these systems frequently doesn't do that, and that's a risk.
Thank you very much. Your point about employee trust is so hugely important. In fact, it's fascinating for me, excuse me, that already we're seeing, because people aren't trusted, they're buying technology now which fakes how many keystrokes they get. You can buy a piece of kit that goes click, click, click all day while you go looking, I don't know, watching TV. So it's such a counterproductive cycle, isn't it? For the panel session that we're going into now, could I have people please put on their cameras? It's so much better for me to be able to see real human beings here. Oh, human beings coming up. Excellent. So before we move on to some of the questions coming through, I had a particular question for you, Neil, which was, so if someone gets fired because they have diabetes and they have to go to the comfort break every hour, who is legally and or morally responsible? The employer who bought that surveillance technology or the developers? Is Harvey right? Is this just the employer's problem?
Well, legally, it's the employer that is responsible. Morally is a different question.
Mm-hmm.
I think the organizations that design these systems have a moral responsibility to design them inclusively. However, that risk is with the company that deploys them. And we see this and I personally, and this is my personal view, I see this as a problem with a lot of the legislation at the moment, where we're seeing some good anti-discrimination legislation coming through, like the European Equality Act and so on. But there are huge swathes of the software industry that are unaffected because they say that this is the responsibility of the employer. This is not their responsibility. It's down to the people that buy it. And so there is no incentive for these organizations to really make that change other than from their customers. And so what you've got is this delay in the customers will eventually start demanding it when they end up in court because they're being challenged on discrimination grounds. But we could have designed this into our legislation, and I think that's an area that we still need to look at.
Well, and I'm concerned, of course, that there won't be enough legal threat because people won't even know that artificial intelligence, they've been treated badly by an algorithm. They won't even know. Gerard, this is your domain. I want to come back to you quickly on this. I was going to ask if you felt that existing equalities legislation, particularly, but not only in Europe, was adequate. And we had a question from one of our attendees saying, do we need to expand the scope of discrimination law by having an open-ended list of grounds of discrimination, in effect, bad behavior, unacceptable behavior, I guess, is how I read that. So you've got proxies for disabilities, such as you can't fire me just because it took me too long to do the test, presumably meaning without proof that disability was not part of that or whatever. So what do you think, Gerard?
So thank you very much. Just to get back to Neil's comments a few moments ago, I think another piece of the puzzle is product liability law and an exploration of some of the positive uses that can be explored to exploit product liability law in this particular context. It is a novel argument that product liability should extend to known risks to discriminate, but it's not far-fetched because in a sense, the user of the technology is outsourcing a lot of the choices to the person or the group that designs the product in the first place. So I think it's an area well worth looking at. I think, is equality law satisfactory? Absolutely not. I mean, one of the interesting things about artificial intelligence is that it short circuits one of the main positive accomplishments of equality law over the last 20 or 30 years, which is the obligation of reasonable accommodation. And to get back at a point Phyllida made it right at the beginning, this is very, very reminiscent of the medical model. It takes us back to the days when there's just a focus on the impairment. There's not a focus on the person. There's not a focus on his or her intrinsic capacities. And even if there is a bump along the road, there certainly isn't a focus on what reasonable accommodation might be provided. That's not to say that the technology could not be turned to that positive purpose. I think it could, but at the moment, it completely undermines equality law as we've known it.
Well, I've long been interested in that product liability or consumer protection, because of course, you could argue that both the employer and the job seeker with a disability are at risk. So it would be protecting both consumers if the manufacturers had to prove their product was safe before it was put on the market. Phyllida, what's your thoughts in terms of how the legal recourse that's available to people with disfigurement? You did some research recently with a very helpful law firm. Where do we stand on that now?
Yes, so the research was conducted by Reed Smith, one of Face Equality International's corporate partners, and it exposed some of the gaps in legal protection here in the UK, in the States, under the European Charter and under the UN CRPD. And all too often, there is a tenuous link between disfigurement and the definition of what a disability is in that country. And case law indicates, particularly here in the UK, that actually cases that make it to tribunal based on that disfigurement provision are actually very minimal. So there are that many barriers between seeking any sort of recourse with the Equality Act as it is. So adding an extra layer of complexity is only ever going to make it that bit harder. And I think what I wanted to convey wherever possible is that, again, the onus is on individuals to have to try and interpret not only complex laws, but now complex software and jargon and stuff that is just far beyond our kind of recognition. So it's incredibly difficult to know, to prove and to know where to go in order to be adequately kind of heard.
Yes, sigh. We have about 7 minutes left. I want to come back to Neil now, because there's a question that perhaps your expertise can help us with. You know, the AI application tracking systems, ATSs. Is there anything out there now that would audit an applicant tracking system to spot where discrimination, where problems, obstacles might actually be encountered as the candidate is trying to get through it? Have you seen any tools there? Because coming back to what Gerard was saying, we should be able to flip this and say, if this is a problem and AI is so damn intelligent, why don't we get the AI to solve the problem? So has AI already made it easier to spot in an ATS system what's going wrong?
So not that I have come across. I have come across some positive impact of AI in terms of recruitment, where AI has used language models to remove gender bias from job descriptions, which has a really positive impact. And we've been looking at similar things for removing and slightly more complex rewording activities with outcomes to make job descriptions also less disability biased, because essentially if you prescribe how a job is done rather than what you need done, that immediately excludes a whole bunch of people that wouldn't do a particular job in a particular way that you would expect, but could perfectly carry out and give you the outcomes that you needed. I think that one of the really big things that needs to happen is, as I mentioned before, explainability of AI. There needs to be much more clarity about and regulation on the explainability of AI systems, so that the people that are buying them, the people that are impacted by them, can understand what the process, what's in the process. Because I can tell you right now that people don't know. They're unaware that, that even the HR professionals are not aware of what's happening. They're not intending to discriminate for the most part. They're trying to use these systems because they're overwhelmed by the number of candidates and the amount of jobs that they've got to filter and everything else. They're trying to be more efficient. They're trying to do the right thing, but at the same time, these systems are built upon decades, if not centuries, of data that already has that innate historical bias built in.
And I would just add that the automated systems typically do not allow anyone to request an adjustment at any stage, whether there's artificial intelligence or not. They wait until a company told me recently, well, we ask them when they get to the interview if they need an adjustment. You say, well, how the devil did they get to the interview? Because they had to go through this and this and this online, and none of it was flexible or adapting. I was going to ask if you felt, as the incoming chair next year of the Global Business Disability Network, that the GBDN group of companies, perhaps with Valuable 500, might work with Gerard to create this space that Gerard was calling for, where the key players from industry and from the UN system and the regulators, et cetera, come together to get a better pitch on this. I'm just going to leave that as a suggestion, because what I was supposed to do at this point was to ask each of you to, as a 1-minuter, tell us what you would say to any employer who walked in the door now and said, yeah, so what do you want us to do? What is that one, well, do this sort of message? Elias, what would you like employers in Ghana to just do tomorrow?
Yes, thank you once again. So like I mentioned earlier, as a person with a stammer, going through a job interview is very daunting. It's very difficult. And there are so many stories here where people have been denied jobs.
Elias, I just want you to have a do message. We don't have much time. What do you want them to do?
Can you hear me?
What do you want them to do?
Yes, so they should make reasonable accommodation for persons who stammer, where the tool does not discriminate. I mean, person who stammer, they do not make their decisions based on certain features like eye contact, verbal and non-verbal communication. Excellent. And all that. And give us time. And give us some more time. Sorry, give us time to be able to complete our interviews.
And this is with me. This is with me not giving you any more time. You're saying this. Yes.
Yes, maybe.
Because you don't have any more time.
Yes.
All right. I have to move on quickly now because we've got a tight deadline, Elias. Gerard, what's your one message to any employer who's listening?
Yeah, I think the AI as currently practiced brings us back to the medical model of disability, and that is most definitely not in the interests of employers. So I think employers should be joining with us in seeking a reversal of intellectual property laws that indecently conceals how AI algorithms actually function in practice, so that there's much more transparency and a better chance of actually enabling litigants to sue for bad practices.
Great. Well, I think you've got Atos behind you. Neil, what's your one message?
Work with the disability community in the design of your systems.
That's a very good message. Well done, you. Phyllida, what's your message?
All of the above, and to ensure that any disability policies explicitly mention disfigurement, and in doing that, your hiring practice should actually recognise the impact that AI has on this community.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And so I think my brilliant panel has come in on time, Jürgen. Yes, thank you to everyone. And I hand over to Jürgen to wave goodbye.
Exactly. No, they're not only coming in on time, but also coming in perfectly on the topic. And thanks so much for also broaden it beyond the specific part of employment. I think it's very much appreciated to understand a little bit better how AI is impacting us, mostly negatively, but also sometimes positively. I think I just want to highlight the two words, trust and flexibility. We know that is one of the, or two of the key things that we don't really get with AI, and we know that is really needed to include people with disabilities in society and of course in the labor force. So thanks so much for being with us today. A special thanks of course to the panelists, also to Susan as a moderator and a thought leader, to all those who joined today, to the international sign interpreters. Stay tuned, this topic will not go away, also not in the Global Business and Disability Network context. Susan volunteered us apparently to work more on this next year, with Neil as Atos representative also being the chair next year of the Global Network. So stay tuned, follow our social media channels. We're not on Twitter, but we are on LinkedIn, so follow our page there. And if you haven't done so, subscribe to our newsletter. Take care and have a good rest of the day, wherever you might be. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.